Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping on our Wildcat Wisdom Online Women in Leadership series. I'm Jamie Weatherby. You've seen me a few times in the past if you jumped on our webinars, but I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement for Career and Professional Success in the UNH Alumni Relations Office. Part of the wonderful work that I get a chance to do is meet with fantastic women leaders to share their stories and learn a little bit about them. So today I'm joined by Muriel Robinette. She is a class of 1997, sorry about that, 1997.
1974.
1974, thank you. She is currently a senior consultant for GZA, Geoenvironmental, but she's had multiple roles in the past, including owning her own business, New England EnviroStrategies, as well as holding sophisticated leadership positions in other organizations from regional vice president to senior vice president. And with that, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I would love just to, you can say it way better than I can, so I would love to hear a little bit about your experience. So can you share an overview of your career? And with that, just say, how much of your career was planned and how much was it taking opportunities as it came? And I think as a young person building their career, it's really, you want to see the end of the road. And I think sometimes that's challenging. So it's nice to know, what was that balance for you?
Yes, it's been quite the journey. I grew up in a very rural area, actually was involved in a very small elementary school where there was only, I think, 11 of us in the whole elementary school,
wow.
grades 1 through 8. And decided I certainly wanted to go on to college, but not really sure what I wanted to do. I was very active outdoors. I enjoyed sports and I enjoyed animals, and so toyed with the idea of, okay, veterinarian or something to be outdoors and enjoy the outdoors. And so I ended up going to the University of New Hampshire because I had a horse and my horse could come to college with me here. So by happenstance, I'm at the University of New Hampshire in 1970 with my horse, doing the dressage work with it that you were certainly very famous for even back then. So how did I get to major in what I did? You know, I was always good at math and science. And so, you know, I started sort of as a math major, and but being outdoors and had a great, wonderful professor of geology who, Dr. Chapman, was absolutely an inspiration and someone who speaks to the value of a good teacher. And he so inspired me because the study of geology is what you see. It's as you drive down the road, it's all around you. So again, sort of by happenstance, I was taking a science course because I was a math major, and you know, that caused me to move into the whole geology side of the house. And from there, again, happenstance, I did a project with a hydrology professor, and it was modeling, and it was all about water systems, and that was fascinating, but that was also tied to the College of Engineering. So my career absolutely took off in the area of water and modeling. And I went on to, after UNH, I went on to graduate school to learn about all that, and got involved with predicting mine water inflow. So I then moved into mining engineering, which is not exactly something I would have thought of back here in New Hampshire, but being out west, that was really, really important. So my academics somewhat is through happenstance. And then workflow was, as I continued to grow in my career, being able to take advantage of opportunities. And certainly that has been my route all along.
Awesome. So it sounds like you first became attracted to engineering when you were at UNH.
Yes.
Now, did you ever have any hesitation? That's an extremely male-dominated space, and you've been able to become an extremely successful female leader within the roles that you've been in the organizations. Were you thinking about that when you were entering that space, or did you just follow your passion, and then what was that experience like?
It's interesting. I actually had a negative experience and role model in doing that. Oh, wow. Because my father was a civil engineer, and he was adamant that I should not be an engineer.
Really?
And whenever someone says to me, I don't think you should do that, that is absolutely what causes me to go for it.
Some fuel.
It's like, let me show you.
I love that.
You know, you say no, watch me.
And was he saying no because it's a male-dominated space and because you were a woman, or was he saying no because of his experience in the industry? What was the motivation behind the no?
His experience, I think, was the fact that there weren't women when he was learning to be an engineer, and when he practiced, all women were administrative assistants, back then called secretaries.
Yeah.
And he just said, oh, you know, women shouldn't be engineers. He said, if you want to go to college and become a teacher or something like that, that would be okay. And of course, that was just absolutely made me livid.
Yeah.
So I went for it.
Well, we are very thankful that you had an opportunity to do that, because had every female who tried to enter a space that was male dominated took that no and decided to go into a different field that was more in line with that gender norm, we would be in a way worse position today. So I'm glad, we're grateful for women like you that thought that way. So it's interesting, you mentioned about how, you know, your father was not super, you know, supportive of that. Did you have a role model or a female role model that, you know, helped you get there, or that helped you envision yourself in that space? Or
I really don't think I did. There were so few women. When I was in graduate school, I think there were 58 graduate students, and there were only 3 females in graduate school in engineering. And so there were no professors that I can recall at all. That were female. And so it really was a matter of kind of slugging it through.
That's incredible. So, which I know has led to a lot of your work with mentorship and creating that women in STEM space to be able to help other women, you know, now that you've paved that way. I think it is really challenging to get into a space where you can't picture anybody like you succeeding in that space. It's really hard to envision yourself there, especially when you're, you know, a young student. Some of them don't even consider themselves in that role, even if they would be great there, just because they don't have that impression. So we talk a little bit about the mentorship opportunities that you've created. I know you've created a whole women in STEM.
Yes, I've felt very strongly as a mother of 2 daughters and a son. I've always felt it was important that girls and women should be able to see themselves. And so when my children were little, I certainly went to their elementary schools and middle schools and high schools and went to their career days and whatever. And that never seemed enough. I mean, it was, I enjoyed doing it with my children's schools. So I've started volunteering, and with the New Hampshire High Tech Council, gone around and done a bunch of presentations. But where I've really been able to kind of hit a stride is with New England Women in Energy and the Environment, which is an organization based out of Boston, and it covers all of the New England states. I chair the mentorship committee, and just developing what it means to be a mentor. How do we guide a one-on-one mentor-mentee relationship, and how do you match people up? Because everyone looks for something different out of a relationship, and helping people find that person and then be able to work together. So the NUI mentorship program has really been a wonderful outlet for me. It's been going now for 3 years. We've had almost 300 people go through our program, so I'm really excited about it.
And I know, so you said it's been going for 3 years, or you've been part of it for 3 years?
I was the original initiator of it, and it's been in existence for 3 years. We're piloting it.
Great.
And hopefully here at the end of 2020, we'll have enough information to be able to really publish that this is the program that we're doing. We're no longer piloting it, in other words, and it's something that we'll be carrying forward.
That's great. So with something like that, how do you have your mentees seek out that program? Like, how do people get involved in that work?
Yes, well, with NUI, number one, you have to be a member. So by becoming a member of the organization, you can then sign up online. We have a special form questionnaire online, and it asks a whole series of questions, both for the mentor and the mentee, so that then we match people based upon what their background was, what they're trying to get into, what their interests are, what their hope for a 3 or 5 year plan, or even something like work-life balance sort of questions.
Yeah,
so we match them up and send them off to so-called with sort of a set of instructions and guidelines, and then it's up to them to make of it what they will.
And then do they continue that relationship outside of the group meetings where it's a one-on-one? Is there an expectation about meeting? I ask because so part of my work is we're working on trying to streamline mentorship at UNH. And a lot of our programs to date have been very almost manual, where we try to match people up, things like that. And then we try to manage those partnerships. And it's challenging. It's challenging to do that. So I would love to know how you do it, if you've done it better than we have, or similar in a lot of ways, which it worked great, but it ends up being just a pretty labor intensive.
We basically, because we want to keep things fresh, we're not trying to develop mentor-mentee relationships that last for too long. We basically bound it with about a 6-month time frame.
Oh, that's great.
And so that they start and enter it and proceed in the program with goals in mind. And at the end of 6 months, we're ready to pull the plug. Now, the mentor-mentee can choose to continue on if they want to.
If they built that relationship, it's still valuable.
Absolutely. Right. We're not going to stop them, though it may take that mentor out of circulation, which is a struggle. We do want to keep pairing new people so that there's opportunity for new people to come on, not just have someone have a long-term relationship.
One match, and then
one match.
Yeah, that makes sense. So
exactly.
we've launched, it's called Wildcat Connections, but it's an online mentorship platform to create kind of a similar dynamic where we're hoping that people will match up with somebody and have great conversations, but it's not a long-term forever kind of relationship, which we find you really have to have the right set of people to have something like that continue to be valuable, and it's hard to mass produce that.
Yes.
So we've done something similar, and it sounds like that works a little bit better, and we've had some success with that.
I would agree. The guidance that we've ended up developing very much is focused on, what goal are you looking for? In some cases, it's simply, I want to get my next job, or I want to ask for a raise, or I really want to become a board member somewhere. How do I position for that? So there's a discrete goal in mind, and then the mentor-mentee work together and hopefully achieve that goal. And in some cases, they achieve it very quickly, and so they don't stay together for 6 months.
Great.
But it's just up to them.
That's great. It's nice that you offer them that flexibility so that it stays high value the whole time. I think that's one of the challenges about long-term mentorships, is if you hit a point where you run out of things, or you achieve that goal in the first 3 meetings, you feel like you're almost forcing it, which isn't ideal either.
That's not good.
So, no, not at all. How large is that program?
Right now we're in our so-called 3rd pilot, and we have I think 64 mentee-mentor pairs that are together right now. There are others that have stayed on from the previous 2 pilots that we've done.
Oh, great.
But I'd say maybe we have about 80 total that are paired and functional right now.
After just a third round, that's a great size though. And are you intending to grow it?
We're trying to.
Yeah.
Our challenge obviously is coming up with the mentors, because there is a commitment on both parts to be able to, and they don't always have to meet face to face. They can do it over Skype. But normally there's a thought process that, you should be talking on a pretty regular basis, and in order to move some sort of an initiative forward, whatever that is. Otherwise it stalls out, and then everybody's unhappy about it.
Right. And it does, I'm sure for a mentor, it does feel like a pretty large commitment. So that is a challenge. It's a challenge for all mentorship programs. So, but it sounds like you've grown pretty significantly. So congratulations on that.
Well, from 0 to where we are.
80 pairs. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It sounds, that's wonderful. I just want to mention too, so if you have any questions for Muriel or throughout our conversation, please drop those the questions into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and my partner Phoebe will be able to answer those and get those to us to be able to integrate them into our conversation. So don't hesitate on that. But to continue, so I just want to know I know you've owned your own business, which I have a bunch of questions about that for you too in a minute. But I know you've held a lot of senior level leadership roles at other organizations. Creating and leading a mentorship program. Have you always seen yourself as a leader when you were young and you were developing yourself in your profession? Is that something that you always knew, or did you happen upon that?
I was always called bossy.
Oh, yeah. See, that's the quintessential female. You're not assertive, you're bossy.
It is. And I think that stems from the fact that I was the youngest in my family by quite a few years. And so to have my voice heard, I had to be assertive. And so I've never hesitated to speak up with adults or in groups or whatever. It's never concerned me. I never thought of that as leadership because I grew up in a time frame where men were the leaders, and that was what was expected, but I didn't hesitate to speak up.
Yeah.
So I think once I was into my 20s, I started understanding that my willingness to speak up, my willingness to not hesitate was advantageous. And it didn't put me in the back. So
great.
But I don't know if I called it leader.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you used the word bossy. So that's a stereotype, right? We get a lot of women in leadership roles get a lot of that, where if they're, being assertive, they get the word bossy, whereas their male counterparts will get, they command a room, or So how have you, they're strong. They, they're someone you don't mess around with, and they mean business, but women get, a couple of levels of B words that happen to them sometimes when they're doing the same exact things. How have you navigated that? Because, being able to be a likable leader is really important, but at the same time, I feel like towing that line is really challenging as a female.
That's an interesting question, because I would say it depends. My experience is that I would struggle with people above me or ahead of me. And I did really well with people who are at my level or below me, because my approach always is that I don't have all the answers, and I don't think any leader has all the answers. The leader is only as strong as the team that they surround themselves with. And so to facilitate the best out of everybody on the team, it's really an equalizer. And so I always am willing to, listen, ask questions, and, listen to people who aren't necessarily, quote, at the level, who may have input on a particular situation, and yet they do. Everybody has input,
right?
And that makes it a more robust solution or answer. And so I'm not terribly hierarchical, and yet oftentimes when you get into a big company, there is hierarchy, and there is an expectation that the senior VPs talk to the senior VPs, and the VPs
make a decision.
And make decisions at that. And I always tried to be bringing in more people.
That's great, though, because I feel like that's where you get the creative solutions, right?
I felt
in a lot of ways.
I felt so.
Absolutely. So then when you were building your resume and growing within your industry, did you ever feel like you came across any opposition or discrimination because you were a minority in that space as a female?
Yeah, I guess not necessarily overt discrimination. I saw, obviously, I took some time off to have my children and whatever, and then coming into a company, and obviously salary was less than male counterparts who had less years of experience, but they hadn't taken any time off.
Right.
And I always felt that, that wasn't necessarily fair. You should pay for the job. If you need this particular job done, then that's what you should be paid for, and not whether or not,
the years leading up to
it. The years necessarily. And so I don't think I necessarily overtly saw that, but I think I certainly experienced it.
Yeah. So I would love to learn more about your business. So how long were you in business for? And so it was New England EnviroStrategies.
Yes, it was New England EnviroStrategies. I started it in the mid-70s in 2007, which is right before the big recession.
And also shortly after graduating. So this was a
2007?
No.
No.
2007. Okay, I thought you were saying in 1990s or
Yeah,
1977.
Yeah,
right.
No,
okay.
No, I worked for
many years.
several other companies, many other years. I actually did start a company for a short period of time in the 70s because I was involved with mining engineering, and the U.S. Bureau of Mines was thrilled that there was a woman mining engineer that they could actually solicit technical information from and modeling. And so I set up my own company so that they could contract with me to do that. And that was some weird, statistic that they were able to add to their their government contracting. But I didn't stay with that. I didn't stay with modeling for mining.
Okay.
But so no, when I really started my company was New England EnviroStrategies in 2007. And I was choosing to leave as a senior vice president from a pretty good sized company. And I basically wanted the freedom, the autonomy to continue to work with my clients who are wonderful and extremely loyal, and work with them in the manner that I wanted to without having some of the trappings of a large company. Yeah. Whether it's on costs, how much I was going to bill, or how I was going to do things. So that's why I started. It was a forensics firm, environmental forensics.
Oh, exciting.
So in forensics, what we're looking at is trying to understand the context of what we see at a particular site. Back in the 70s, there was a lot of, and earlier, we've done a lot of manufacturing. We've used and made and have a lot of chemicals, and sometimes releases occur, and then we only discover them later because the chemistry has evolved such that we can actually see those chemicals in the environment. And so my field is in forensics, which is understanding how the chemicals got there, when, and maybe even who did them, and time frame. So that affects for insurance and allocation and things like that. So that was my focus.
So then, so when you were starting your business, not only are you, in a male-dominated space when you're working for in another company, but starting your own company must have had its own challenges and its own hurdles, being either a female-owned business or, as female-owned business in a male-dominated space. So what was the launch and the start of that business like, or getting that off the ground, or funding for that?
Yeah, the launch came sort of out of the blue, deciding, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And then the harsh reality of the structure that goes around that. And when you start a business, of course, I went to some of my lawyer clients and said, all right, I want to start this business. And they gave me advice as far as my structure and how to do it. But then you hire people, and that means payroll. And then you get into the business side of clients don't necessarily always pay in a period of time. And so that meant cash flow. Right. And cash flow meant line of credit. So what I ran into basically by the end of 2007, because I was growing too fast, I needed to have more payroll and money, and I needed cash flow, was that I needed to go and get a line of credit. And so where do you go to get money? You go to a bank. Right. So I went to the bank that I personally do business with, and they looked at me like I had 16 heads and said, I don't think so. You need to go to a bank that does business lending. I said, okay. Right. So I went to 7 different major banks in New Hampshire. And I was turned down by all of them. I was so flabbergasted because I had a business. I had accounts receivables. I had clients that were writing checks for tens of thousands of dollars to me. Right.
So what was the rationale for turning you down for that loan?
They said, well, you have no history in the business. I said, well, I've been a consultant doing this work for the last 30 years, and these are the same clients, and they're paying the bills. And they said, no.
You have a history of all those payments. It's not like, I'm sure all the documentation was there.
Exactly. And so I said, well, I don't know what I can. And they said, well, what you can give us is, if you want $250,000 of cash flow, then put $250,000 in our bank, and then we will give you a $250,000 float. I said,
That makes no
I
sense.
don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get it. So I ended up going down to Boston and had no problem at all getting the loan.
That's so interesting. So you ran into all that opposition in New Hampshire, but when as soon as
Yes.
you went to Boston, you didn't have that same kind of issue.
And I asked the bank why. And they said, well, because there's so many women entrepreneurs down here. And I think that somehow there weren't that many women business owners in New Hampshire versus a more urban area.
Yeah. You know what? I feel like I've learned from a lot of these interviews and speaking with other women that have started their own businesses is I didn't realize how subjective bank loans are. I thought that was going to be much more of a clear-cut process. I personally have not tried to go and get a business loan, so I don't really know what that process looked like. But I would imagine that there was a clearer process where it was less, subjective and less of a judgment call on the person you were talking to than it is. And it amazes me to hear that repeatedly, that it just depends on who you ask.
And my banker in Boston is a woman.
It sure changed everything, right?
It absolutely changed everything. Yeah. Every other time when I approached the New Hampshire banks, all of the so-called business bankers were men.
Yeah.
And they did, my husband was in the business with me, and they said, well, where is he? And I said, well, he's not a major owner. No, I am.
I'm representing my company.
I'm representing
the
company, and I'm in a position to be able to sign for this, and he's not.
Right.
And they wouldn't hear of it.
That's insane. That's true. Well, at least you were, the type of person that didn't take no for an answer, which seems to be a theme, which I think is why you, have made it to the level you're at. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities where you could have taken no for an answer, and thank goodness you didn't.
Right. You cannot take no for an answer.
Yeah.
There's always a way.
Yeah. So then what was it like to lead a company versus leading your own company? How did that change your style or your experience maybe?
Well, I think my style stayed similar in that I'm very inclusive, and I really want to seek and receive counsel from everybody who's associated with whatever the problem is. In my case, of course, in starting a company is how do we run the company? What are going to be the culture and how we're going to approach all the various aspects of it. And so I've always wanted to be and am inclusive and at every level. When I was in larger companies, I was called out for talking to the wrong people. Sometimes
to the wrong people, like within your organization?
Yes, within the organization. In other words, if we're going to be considering this new business line, that needs to be a decision just at this level and not at the next level down. And I always have felt that, well, but these people have their feet on the ground and have a perspective about this other business line also, and that they can provide some input.
Yeah.
The decision ultimately is going to be at whatever level it needs to be. But information is, to me, key.
Right.
And so I feel like I kept a similar style when I had my own company as when I tried to operate in a larger company. But I wasn't as hierarchical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you figure, I would imagine in a lot of ways through those levels of the hierarchy, information probably not shared all the way through from the bottom to the top. So if decisions get made at one level, they're probably missing a good percentage of the information of what, the day-to-day work of that business is like.
Right.
So
that was my feeling.
Yeah. And what was it like? So now you recently sold your business, correct?
Yes.
So what was that like, or that process like?
It was interesting. When I decided that I needed to sell the business, obviously I've got a little gray hair here. So I've been in this business for a while, and I needed to sell it because frankly, I needed to be able to move on. I needed to be able to take my next step. And I hadn't brought in people into my business such that they would be able to carry it forward. Yeah. They were not the direct contacts with clients. They didn't have kind of the same sort of business fire that I had. So selling the company made sense, so that gave them a place to continue their career working on that work and whatever. But it was quite interesting because when you do shop your business, everybody peeks under the hood, but they peek under a lot of things. And it's
Right.
kind of like going to the doctors.
Yeah.
It felt quite personal.
Yeah, I mean, everything's exposed. They're going
Extremely
for
personal.
everything that,
Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
that you build, it's so much ownership over it. It feels like someone
I
going
feel
through
like
your
a
personal bank account.
mother with mother ducklings or something,
Yeah.
baby ducklings or something like that. I just wanted to protect everybody. I had some very strong opinions as to how all the staff needed to be treated and how we did it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it turned out to be fine and it worked well. And all my clients came with us and all the work continues.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
so that, it's been a successful sale and now I can look at retirement.
That's fantastic. Well, good.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a good place to be, right?
Thank you.
To be able to
Thank
be
you.
on that side of things. Are you still involved with it at all from a consulting perspective or from
I'm still a senior consultant with
Okay.
these same clients and making sure that all the transitions occur and that the work stays. And
yeah, that's
being
fantastic.
sold.
I'm sure that helps a lot for the client relationship, right? To know that
It
you're
does.
still involved. If they signed on when you start a business, I imagine they signed on largely in part because they believe in you.
There's a
And-
trust factor.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So
They
it's
need
great
to
that you
know.
can carry that forward at least through that transition.
Correct. Yeah, very much so.
So what do you think is the most important quality in a leader then?
Oh,
To boil it down.
yeah, to boil it down, I think valuing everyone. I really feel that, a goal of a leader is to understand and draw out the strengths and the talents of everybody that you're working with. And when you do that, then their motivation comes from a position of strength and confidence. And that buoys everything along. It feels so destructive to me when I experience a leader whose attitude is, put their thumb on people or to one-upmanship with people or to kick the legs out from under someone to prove that they're over them or something. And that's just such the wrong way. And I feel like that whole supporting each other, collaborating, valuing the individuals and what they bring. Everybody brings something different to the table.
Right.
And that's what gives it the strength and,
Yeah.
and the breadth of whatever the decisions are or what the business is doing. And it isn't the capabilities of one person at all.
Right. Excellent. Well, so from one of our previous conversations, I know that you and your husband divided and conquered your, personal lives and business lives in a non-traditional way, and without the standard gender norms. I would love to hear a little bit about that experience for you, and especially for, your family or for your husband and how that looked for you, because you've been in such high-powered roles. That work-life balance question is always something that women get asked and men don't, and oftentimes men don't because they assume that they have a wife at home taking care of that piece of the puzzle.
That's right.
So what was that part like for you and for him?
That was a huge, I think that was probably a defining moment in our family life and our career and whatever, because my husband and I actually have similar technical backgrounds and similar degrees and can do very similar things. And he had chosen a role through government, and I had chosen a role through private consulting and private business. And we were blessed with 2 lovely children, and then kind of a surprise happened. We suddenly had 3 children. And we really thought about it a lot. And the whole work-life balance is important, and the children's needs are important. And we didn't want to have a nanny dealing with 3 children. We didn't want to do that. And so we really looked each other in the eye and said, well, what are we going to do here? And he said, pick me. He was in government, and he said, I enjoy my job, but he said, I'd love to tackle taking care of the home full time.
Yeah.
And so luckily we were blessed the fact that my income was sufficient so that we could do that.
Yeah.
And
that's progressive thinking on his part too, because I would imagine at that time, it wouldn't have been perceived the same way for him. He might have had some opposition in himself when he said to his friends and his family
yes,
that, he was going to stay home. I think that that's thankfully becoming more common to say,
Yes.
it doesn't have to always be the woman that stays home and the man that's working.
Correct.
Now people, I think, are more free to make that choice based on their independent situation.
Yes.
But I would imagine when you were making that decision, that was not as common.
It was interesting. I don't think it was as common. We couldn't really put our fingers on anybody else who'd made that decision.
Right.
At his work, they were refusing to accept his resignation, which was interesting.
Which means they valued him quite a bit, I'm sure, in some ways. But
well, and of course, ultimately they can't stop something like that. But they were
right.
really pushing him on that side of
that
it.
being.
And I was in a situation where I literally went back to work 4 days after I had our third child. So
Oh, wow.
it was a time where we felt this was right for us, and if it's right for us, then we can make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it doesn't matter what other people think. And so it made a big difference for me, because you're absolutely correct in that I could raise my hand and say, pick me.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Yes, I can do that role, because it means traveling. And I did. I commuted to California for a while.
Wow. From New Hampshire?
From New Hampshire.
Holy cow.
Exactly. Every other week I would go out there for about 4 days. And so I could do that because our home life was very secure, that the children were doing well in school. And I went through the guilt. But I also knew that it was working for the family, because we weren't giving up anything other than my personal time with the kids.
Which is a sacrifice too, for whether you're, the mother or the father in that situation. Yes. That sacrifice.
And that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's that sacrifice, which I think in our society, we haven't accepted the sacrifice that men have made in that family unit.
Absolutely.
And so when a woman makes that sacrifice, she's hard and cold and whatever. And it's a reality of we had the luxury of that choice. Right. Not everybody has that luxury.
Which is interesting, because you had the luxury of that choice. And I think that it's almost a luxury in a lot of families when, if the father can support the family and have the mom stay home, that's a luxury too. And then when you're both balancing it, there's just a lot of pros and cons to both. And I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of sacrifices that get made all around.
Yes.
And some get a certain level of weight and others don't. And I think that that's definitely unfortunate, because it's not easy, whether you're the one that's working, and traveling to California 4 days a week and away from your family, or you're the one staying home. Both come with that sacrifice.
And I think society itself hopefully is shifting its mindset of the value of that. But I know when I was growing up, to me, being a housewife was just a horrible thing. I mean, it meant you weren't going to be respected.
Right.
It meant your voice didn't count.
Right.
It didn't matter. And yet there's such value in raising families and to society in a broader sense, whether it's men or women, and hopefully both. But I think we're still growing and recognizing that.
Yeah, I would love, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I would be interested to know the percentages of how many in families, when somebody has the opportunity to stay home, even today, what the percentages on how many men stay home versus how many women stay home. I still would imagine that they're very, very skewed. So, I would imagine you are one of a leader in that way too, especially when you share that experience with your friends and family to say this works for us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I don't know the statistics on it. I did meet one other lawyer, a female lawyer whose husband stayed home, and it was like, wow, this is great.
Someone else,
but we haven't seen it very often.
Yeah. So because of that experience, what advice would you give to a husband and wife team that are trying to figure out how to balance that, the home and the work and the income parts of everything? And maybe they do think a less than traditional way would work for them. What would you give them for advice, having, led some of that charge?
I would really hope that they would feel empowered to make the decision that's right for their family, because there is really no one right answer. It's what works for your family. And I've asked my husband several times about how he feels about it. And he said, anybody he talked to about it, everyone was saying, I'm really jealous.
Yeah.
I missed out on all that.
Yeah.
Because he put it in a very positive light. I think if if you're going to make a decision, weigh it and go for it.
Yeah, and own it. It sounds like he owned it and was really very positive about it, which I think is really critical, right? If he handled it like, you know, he was either making a sacrifice or not happy with that choice, it probably wouldn't have painted the same picture.
Exactly. In fact, I mean, he's got a great story about, you know, he would be filling out the forms or whatever for the children for school and whatever, and you say occupations, and he'd write Mr. Mom.
Oh, cute.
Because that was back in the age where I think there was even a movie or a book about Mr. Mom.
Yeah,
so he
oh, how great.
He grabbed it. He absolutely grabbed it. And then he'd also go in and because he's a scientist and geologist or whatever, he would go in and sit with the kids and talk about rocks. And, you know, he would be his technical self too, but he'd also do the grab on to Mr. Mom.
Oh, well, he sounds like a great partner.
He absolutely is very solid in his own shoes. You know, you've got to believe in yourself and your persona. Carry that off.
Absolutely. And you said, I believe you mentioned he did go back to work too, right?
Yes.
And he jumped back into his own career after.
Right. Yep. He is, and he's working now as a consultant. And so, he's very much jumped back into his career.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing all that. I think that is a challenging decision for a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot of feelings and emotions on, you know, one way or the other. It's that
baggage.
Yes.
It's baggage.
Well, it's a lot of stigmas around it, and a lot of things that you know, whether you're putting those on yourself or other people put them on you, I think that there's a lot that happens with that choice.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in preparation for our interview, I did research. It's a 2019 McKinsey Lean In report. So it's a report that talks all about women in business and women in the workplace. And there's a couple quotes, and I've asked a few of our other interviewees, and I'd love your opinion on them. And I'm going to read this just right from here. But one of the quotes was, I would say that I've received a fraction of the opportunities I would have as a white man. This was a female of diverse background. The ones I did receive, I had to fight really hard for. I've seen white men groomed for leadership. That didn't really happen for me. I felt like I had to kick down doors to get there. What's your reaction to that? You know, especially being from, you know, heading into such a male-dominated space. Did you feel like there was some kicking down doors that had to happen to get to where you are?
Literally kicking down doors. When I was as a mining engineer, I was going to inspect a mine, and the mining owner said, "There's never been a woman underground in this mine, and you know, we're not going to start now." And I said, "Well, I'm representing, you know, Mine Safety Health Administration and the Bureau of Mines, and I'm taking the first woman underground, and you can choose to go with me or not. It's up to you."
Wow.
And I went underground that day.
Well, because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to do your job.
Otherwise, I would not have been able to do my job.
Right.
Without doing that and being that assertive. So I would agree. I think there are times when you literally do kick down the doors. I found out about a board meeting that was going to happen because I was on a couple of different boards, and all the male board members were meeting. And I found out about it just by happenstance by talking to one of their assistants saying, "Oh yeah, they're going off to meet." And it's like, I don't know about this. So, you know, I literally jump in the car and drive 4 hours so I can break down the door and be at this meeting, which I had every right to be there, but I wasn't told about it.
Do you think that was deliberate, or was that an oversight?
It was totally deliberate.
Oh, God.
Totally deliberate, because a lot of times on board meetings, decisions are made sort of outside the boardroom by kibitzing around with different people.
Right.
So then you show up to the boardroom and you have your discussions, and then the vote has already been decided.
Right, before you even knew about it.
Yeah, and if you've got 6 males and 1 female, and the vote's going to be by majority.
Yeah. So did you feel like a lot of those decisions throughout your career kind of happened behind the scenes where you didn't get a chance to weigh in because you weren't part of that, you know, I want to say inner circle, but because of the gender discrimination?
The males tended to stick together, and they would have their discussions about it. And sometimes, you know, when you get into the board meeting, there would be debate and whatever. And my position might be similar. and I might be in agreement and everything was fine. And
Right,
there are
right.
times when I'm not.
Yeah.
And I would make that pretty well known. But if the vote had already been decided outside the boardroom, then it still went through that way.
Right, right, regardless of your opinion on it or
Correct.
not. Yeah, that's
Correct.
really hard. I think we have a question from online.
Excellent.
Have you seen more acceptance of women in your field over the past 10 years or so, or do you feel it's still very much a place where women need to kick down the doors?
I've seen wonderful influence of influx of more young women into my field. In fact, I would say I work now with more women than I do men.
Wow, really?
But it's at my level and below. I would say leadership is still male dominated.
Right.
But I'm so thrilled with this group of women coming along that are doing well, that in 10, 15 years, I think we're going to see a very different representation in leadership and ownership, management, boardrooms, et cetera. And I'm really excited about it in policy, politics. Oh, I'm thrilled.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I would imagine because it was male dominated, the people that are in those leadership roles are probably the ones with the longest experience that are set up for that role, even not because of their male or female either way, but because they have that experience. So it'd be interesting once the women have that experience and they're more accepted, it'd be heartbreaking to know at that point, will it be more common for an equally qualified man to an equally qualified woman to be within that role, because I would imagine that that's a great reason why there's still a lot of men in leadership roles. But as the women that have entered the space continue to grow into those leadership levels of years of experience, hopefully we'll see that balance.
Hopefully we will. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would agree.
And then the follow-up question is, what advice would you give a young woman looking to get into your field?
I would say that obviously study hard, do the best, be articulate, outspoken, not hesitant, and say yes. It's always about saying yes, positioning yourself to take advantage of opportunities. I mean, like we'll have jobs. They'll say, oh, well, we've got this job in Puerto Rico, and 10 guys will say, pick me. But I want to see the women put their hand up and say, sure, I'll take that. I'd like to do that.
Absolutely.
So that, and also I would suggest is see if you can find a senior woman to glom onto, ask questions.
Yeah, that mentorship is so important, or the guidance and somebody who's been there and done that.
And I really think there's huge value of female to female partnerships in career growth, because otherwise it can be rather patronizing.
Absolutely. So it's been said that when a man receives a promotion, he spends about 80% of his time working at his job and doing great at his new role. But really 20% of his time, he's still focused on the next opportunity and building those relationships. Whereas the stereotypical response to that on a female side is that she'll spend 120% of her time proving that she was the right choice for that job when getting the promotion. What's your reaction to that? And do you see that kind of thing happening within your space?
I do, from the standpoint of, I think women tend to be, again, collaborative and very much anxious to have a strong input from people that they work with. And so in effect, they're looking at their level and below. Whereas males tend to always be looking above them, always looking to people who can affect their promotion and affect their next position. And so they're not doing, in my opinion, doing their job and working with the people that they're working. They're always in some ways brown nosing to get above. Sadly. Sadly.
So what do you think, if that's the case, what do you think as a female, what has been your strategy to advocate for yourself to be able to get to those other roles? Because I think a lot of times it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know. So, the men in that scenario have a good idea of, when you put yourself in that, C-suite space or in leadership roles and you become close with those people, then they start wanting to bring you up to their space. So how have you been able to, advocate for yourself?
And I can only really speak from the field of consulting, which is what I've been in. And what speaks to leaders in consulting is the clients that you have, the jobs you bring in, the amount of money you bring to a business.
Right.
And so early on, I've always recognized that I would get more attention from leaders in a company if I had a large cadre of clients and business and billings that came with me. And so I actually focused externally as much or more so than I did internally. And so, you bring in a $6 million job and people in the corporate suite say, oh, my goodness, here's this project manager bringing in a $6 million job. That's kind of unusual. And so getting attention by doing something that is valued, not necessarily trying to cultivate the relationship with a person, but doing what they value. And in consulting, that's obviously clients and bringing in work. And that may not be the case in other areas. And
yeah, but I mean, that makes perfect sense though, right? Because you're bringing the value that you're bringing to the table speaks for itself. It's all, it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. You can show your revenues, you can show your long-term partnerships, you can show things like that.
Profitability, and it's like, okay.
So it's a little more black and white that way, which is advantageous, I would imagine. Because when it's not like that, then you really do have to kind of go on, your merit, or you can show your work performance, but I think it's still not, you can't consider dollars to dollars in a lot of industries.
True. I do have in engineering and in consulting, it is more dollars and cents. And certainly I would argue that there are people in very high positions that aren't necessarily good leaders.
Yeah.
They may be able to manipulate the dollars and cents and run the business.
Right.
But you're in a business, you're leading people. And being able to connect with and inspire staff, to me, is what's being a real leader in engineering, not necessarily manipulating the dollars and cents.
Right, which is interesting because I think it's really common for leadership roles. Somebody who's phenomenal at their job and can show those results is, put up for leadership opportunities, but they're almost two different skill sets. Doing your job really being very well compared to leading other people to do their jobs very well is almost like two different things.
I certainly agree.
Yeah, so there's definitely a challenge there, and it's really great when you can get that balance, when you're really exceptional at your job, but you also have the emotional intelligence to lead people to do very well.
Which I think is what women bring to the table, and accepting that it's not that soft foo-foo stuff, that it really truly drops money to the bottom line, which it does. And there's all sorts of studies that show that when you have a better representation of women's perspectives in business, that the business does better.
Yeah.
And it's because the people who support the business are doing better. And so I think we're on the right track.
Getting there.
Yeah. We've
slowly
all been
but surely
banging our heads against the glass ceiling, but that's okay because it's going to make room for others.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's great. So I guess I would love to know, we're getting close to the end of our hour. So I would love to know, what was the best advice that you ever received? And if on the heels of that, would you, pass that same advice along, or do you have a different perspective than what you received?
I've always been, and I go back to my dad, who was a little bit of a protagonist for me, because he was, women
Does he
can't
know
do that,
he's
or whatever.
a protagonist for you? Does he know that that's
but he always said, don't talk about it, show me. Just put action to your words. And
it's pretty great advice.
I really think that if we put action to our words, then that speaks for itself. And that's a good piece of advice.
Excellent. And what's next for you? So I know you're a senior consultant at GZA.
Right.
So what's that piece in your career been like, after selling your business and things? Where do you see yourself going?
It's consulting has been wonderful. I've enjoyed it, and I plan to retire in 2020. But
congratulations!
I decided to take on a challenge. In math and engineering, there's a lot about structures and stresses and trusses and all this kind of stuff. And I said, my goodness, I've never built a building. So my husband and I, again, decided to grab onto that, and we built a 1,300 square foot building. We call it a
Mm.
bunkhouse at our camp, and we love it so much that, you know, we're involved with Habitat for Humanity, and
Oh, that's great.
and absolutely want to continue in this whole of the trades area.
Mm-hmm.
So so I will retire and probably swing a hammer.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to, you're in the giving back phase of things where you get
Yes.
to pick the things that you really are passionate about and like, and be able to kind of go into those spaces.
Very much so.
Well, congratulations. I didn't realize that about retiring in
Thank you.
2020. So that's a
Yes.
huge milestone.
That is. It is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
For those on the webinar, we have a poll. If you have 2 seconds before we finish to be able to fill that out for us, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, Muriel, thank you so much for all
Thank
your
you.
time. You've been wonderful to get to know, especially, but you know, your advice in the STEM space for young women has been amazing. So thank you for all of that time.
Thank you.